Everybody says they want scary movies, but what most people really mean is they want a horror movie that is going to make them jump out of their skin a few times before forgetting about it 5 minutes later. And while these types of movies do certainly serve a purpose, and I love plenty of these types of movies, for me, real horror is different. For me, real horror gets under your skin and it leaves you thinking about the film for days. It makes you want to question what you've just watched, but most importantly, it makes you afraid to turn the light off before you go to bed. Now, something that frustrates me is some of the scariest films I've ever seen aren't the famous films. They are films that people don't talk about, movies that have slept under the radar, and that is such a shame because they are terrifying. So I've picked a bunch of films that I think deserve more attention, but more importantly, every single one of these films actually scared me. So my name's Rookie, I love horror movies, and here are 10 underrated horror movies that will actually scare you. So first up we have Lovely Molly. So this is a horror movie I've actually been banging on about for years, but somehow I still don't really see this pop up on underrated horror movie lists anywhere. The film was directed by Eduardo Sanchez, one of the minds behind the Blair Witch Project. So the film follows Molly, this young recovering addict who moves back to her family home with her new husband. But as she gets there, she slowly starts to lose her grip on reality as something really sinister awakens in the house simply because she's there. So the movie utilizes both traditional film as well as found footage, which is hardly surprising because, you know, this comes from Eduardo Sanchez. And normally when a film does that, they know that the found footage section of the film is where you're going to get most of the scares. And while a lot of the scares do take place throughout the kind of found footagey parts, the rest of the film is also terrifying as well for numerous reasons. This movie is smart, it's clever, it knows how to frighten you through ambiguity, right? You never know whether you're watching mental illness, addiction, trauma, or something genuinely supernatural. The film is constantly blurring them lines until we as the audience aren't sure what's going on. The movie also contains loads of genuinely terrifying scenes that manage to be really disturbing at the same time without relying on like loads of gore. And the thing that really sucks is, even though this was directed by one of the people behind the Blair Witch Project, one of the most successful horror films of all time, the film kind of just vanished into obscurity not long after it released. Please go watch this film. Next up we have The Fourth Kind. Now this might just be the scariest horror movie from the 2000s. So the film was released in 2009 and directed by Olatunde Osunsanmi. And if you're a lover of both supernatural horror and like sci-fi horror, you absolutely need to check out The Fourth Kind. So this movie follows Abigail Tyler, a psychiatrist who lives in Nome, Alaska. Now, as a part of her job, she puts patients under hypnosis to try and get to the cause of, their issues. And as she does this, she starts to realize that all of these patients are starting to describe the same terrifying encounters. So this isn't just one of the scariest films from the 2000s, it's one of the most interesting films from the early 2000s because it's both a traditional film, a mockumentary, and like reenactments all tied into one. And it was so convincing, the marketing behind this film, led people to believe that this was based on a true story, and the found footage in this film was real footage. And I think that's what this movie's greatest strength is. The mockumentary or found footage sections of this film are genuinely scary, like actually scary. Now, I'm not usually a sci-fi horror person, right? But this film totally got under my skin, man. There is one scene in particular in this movie that involves levitation that is horrifying. The first time I saw it, I actually hid behind a pillow. This is as close to perfect as a horror film is going to get from around that time. The issue with this movie is people got really upset with the way this film was marketed. They weren't happy about being kind of tricked into believing that this was real. I guess it made people feel silly. That in itself, I think is silly. I think this is a fantastic movie. It's terrifying and you should watch it. Next up we have Savageland. So if you find creepy photographs scary, this film should scare you. Savageland was released in 2015 and was directed by Simon Herbert and David Whelan. The movie takes place in this small town on the Mexican border. One night, the entire town is wiped out, completely wiped out, with only one survivor. He essentially gets blamed for this massacre, and we think it's a closed case until we find the photographs. So this is a mockumentary found footage horror movie. The interesting thing about this is it's not really a found footage movie, it's a found photography movie. And I think it's the only one that has done that. The entire story from that night is told through photographs, but we also have like interviews with people surrounding the case, as well as like this documentary footage. And we follow these investigators as they try and piece together what actually happened that night. This film is solid proof that you don't need jump scares every 5 seconds or, you know, gore or monsters to make a genuinely, effectively scary movie. All of the scares in this movie come from the photographs themselves, but the interesting thing about that is the photographs don't really show us that much, so it's our own imagination that's scaring us. It's the type of movie where you'll find yourself staring at every single frame to try and find something that you've missed. I absolutely love this film. The film barely received any promotion, and because of that, it flew directly under the radar. And that genuinely is a shame, because I think this is one of the smartest found footage style movies out there. Next up, we have Possum. So Possum was released in 2018 and directed by Matthew Holness. The movie centers around a disgraced puppeteer who returns to his family home and is forced to confront terrible memories. Throughout this entire movie, we see that he is carrying around a puppet, one of the most disturbing puppets you'll ever see in any horror film, and he is trying to get rid of this thing, but it just won't stay lost. The puppet in this movie is genuinely horrifying. Now, I usually find horror movies about haunted dolls or possessed puppets to be quite silly, but this movie is anything but silly. This is a serious horror film. And I think the puppet design in this movie is single-handedly the most horrific design I have seen in any movie like this. But underneath all that horrifying imagery, this is an incredibly bleak horror film about, you know, suppressed childhood trauma. The film is slow, it is uncomfortable, and it refuses to give you any relief whatsoever. It's a movie that will keep you guessing from start to finish. It contains one of the darkest and most upsetting endings to any horror film you'll see. And the film stars Sean Harris, who I think is one of the most underrated actors of all time. He is fantastic. I'll watch him in absolutely anything, and his performance in this movie is harrowing, one of his best performances. I think this movie was overlooked simply because of how bleak and upsetting it actually is, but I think that people see the creature design and, you know, the name of the movie, and that kind of puts them off as well. But if you're willing to be patient, this film will absolutely devastate you. Speaking of horrifying imagery, next up we have Daddy's Head. Released in 2024, Daddy's Head was directed by Benjamin Barefoot. So this movie centers around a young boy whose dad passes away, and he is now living with his stepmom. Their grief takes a horrifying turn when this shape-shifting creature turns up and essentially starts stalking them. So Daddy's Head is scary on so many different levels. The creature itself is terrifying. The way it acts, the way it sounds, and its purpose is horrifying. And the film naturally is a film, you know, about grief, and it taps into grief the same kind of way movies like The Babadook or Relic do. Now, I remember when this movie was released, some people really liked it and other people didn't like it, and I honestly think that that's why this kind of you know, fell into obscurity, because it wasn't universally loved. But for me, I've always found horror movies about grief to be really compelling, and when done correctly, really terrifying. And this movie, I personally believe, has done it correctly. It weaponizes grief against you, and if you are somebody who has unfortunately ever lost somebody that you love, you should connect to this film because it isn't just a scary film, it's also quite a moving film at the same time. It's a slow movie, but I think it's intentionally slow, and I'm not one of these people who thinks slow horror movies are boring. I think that slow storytelling serves a purpose. Daddy's Head is a methodical look at grief, and it is scary. Next up we have Homebody. So I watched this film recently. It has yet to premiere anywhere and it doesn't have a release date, but holy hell, you need to buckle in because this film scared me more than any film has scared me since Skinamarink. So the film was made by Nick Totti and Rachel Kempf. Now they are the mind behind the fantastic short horror film Dead Grandma. The film centers around a young woman who has recently lost her husband to cancer, and she meets a homeless lady who claims she can speak to the dead, so she lets this woman move into her house with her. Now what starts as a slow, methodical and even emotional look at grief quickly turns into something much darker, much more disturbing, and much uglier. Now this movie completely blindsided me. There is a sequence halfway through this movie when we think that things are kind of getting better that is so jarringly upsetting. I didn't expect it to be there, and the sound design is horrifying, it is disturbing, and it just doesn't stop. It keeps going and it keeps going. It's a rare thing for a horror movie to well and truly scare me these days, and this movie did it. Now I think this is a movie like Skinamarink that you will benefit from watching on your own in the dark with a laptop on your chest with headphones in. Everything was shot on MIDI DV, and then it was transferred over to VHS, and it gives it this really gnarly, haunted, cursed vibe. It has body horror, it has supernatural horror, it has psychological horror. It's fantastic. It's one of my favorite horror films I've watched this year, easily. Keep it on your radar. When this comes out, you need to check it out. Next up, we have Relic. So Relic came out in 2020 and was directed by Natalie Erica James. The movie centers around a woman who returns to her family home with her daughter after her mum mysteriously goes missing. Now when they get there, they discover, evidence of her dementia scattered all around the place. And it doesn't take very long until they realize that something far darker and way more sinister is actually happening. So on the surface, this is a haunted house movie. It's a supernatural horror movie. But really, this is one of the most haunting depictions of Alzheimer's or dementia I've ever seen. Watching somebody slowly disappear, even though they are still alive, is terrifying in so many different ways. And the movie symbolizes this in a really inventive yet haunting way. Is the only way I can describe this movie. We have movies now like Skinamarink, we have movies like Backrooms, and I feel like Relic deserves to kind of be lumped together with them films because there is imagery in this film that is very reminiscent of those two films. I would go as far to say as Relic is a liminal space horror movie for sure. It's bizarre and it's confusing, and it's one of them horror movies where the house itself kind of feels like an entity on its own, or the house is the metaphorical mind which everybody is living in, and these people feel like memories walking through this house. The film has a really emotional ending, and it's just a film that I think deserves more attention. I talk about this quite a lot actually. Next up we have Incantation. Now this is a scary found footage horror movie. Released in 2022, Incantation was directed by Kevin Coe. So this is a movie that centers around an ancient curse that comes after the daughter of a woman who broke this ancient taboo years earlier. Now I think that non-Western horror movies have always been way scarier than Western horror movies, and Taiwanese horror in particular, like Incantation, utilize something that Western horror can't, and that is heritage and years and years and years of tradition. And because of that, I think Incantation is one of the most effective found footage horror movies from the last decade. This is, simply put, a scary film. It constantly pulls the audience into participating in the curse. The imagery completely gets under your skin, and the final act is relentless. So I think it's safe to say that this film is inspired by other sort of Asian horror movies or found footage horror movies like Nori the Curse or Gonjiam Haunted Asylum. And while this film has gone on to be quite huge in certain parts of Asia, it hasn't really stuck the landing here. And I think that is simply put down to the fact that this is a non-Western horror movie with subtitles. And, you know, some people don't like to read subtitles. And if you're one of them people, all I have to say to you is, grow up. If you're excluding horror movies simply because they are subtitled, you are going to be missing out on loads of incredibly well-made horror films, but also, more importantly for this list, scary horror films. And while we're on the subject of Asian horror, next up we have The Medium. So this movie was kind of produced between Thailand and South Korea. Now please don't let that put you off, because this film is terrifying. It's fantastic. The film follows a documentary crew who travel to this region of Thailand to interview a shaman who claims he is possessed by a demon. Now when her niece starts to show signs of possession, they start to realize that this like demonic deity is a malevolent amalgamation of like their family's past sins. Now what starts as this like slow documentary gradually, you know, descends into absolute chaos. This is a horror film that spends 2 hours like building some real intense dread, and the finale is just insane. So the film is obviously saying a lot about, you know, inherited trauma or inheriting the sins of your ancestors, and it presents it in such a way that it feels like you know, any other type of found footage horror movie or mockumentary. There are scenes, sequences, and imagery in this film that will rival anything you've seen in any other type of Western found footage horror movie. But I think that this horror movie is more than that. It's slow, it's methodical, and it has a lot to say, which is unusual for found footage, I think. And like Incantation, I think that this film has flown under the radar simply because it is a non-Western horror movie with subtitles. And finally, we have The Haunted. So this is a really obscure TV horror movie released in 1991, directed by Robert Mandel. The film is said to be based on the true story surrounding the haunting of the Smell family that was actually investigated by grifters Ed and Lorraine Warren. So this was released years before the Conjuring movies were released and turned the Warrens into these like blockbuster characters. But this TV movie, you know, follows a case that they said was one of their darkest cases ever. Now, whether you believe in the paranormal or not, whether you like the Warrens or dislike the Warrens, this is scary, and I talk about it all the time. If you haven't seen this, you are missing out on one of the scariest paranormal horror films released, not just in the 90s, but like I've ever seen. There are scenes and moments in this movie, there is imagery in this movie that is far better than any sort of Conjuring film can be. And I think this movie holds up by today's standards as well. And I think because this is an old sort of like TV production, it does add something to the spookiness of this, especially when we watch it today. Like when I'm looking for a scary film, I want it to feel like a nightmare. I want it to feel like somebody has managed to take their nightmare and put it on film, and that's what this feels like. It is 100% criminally forgotten. The thing I've always loved about horror is how personal fear is. The films that I love, or the films that scare me the most, might not scare other people. I say this all the time, but one person's masterpiece is another person's slow burn, boring snorefest. But I feel like every single film on this list understands something very, very important. The scariest horror movies don't necessarily always show you the thing that is meant to scare you. They're the films that get inside your head the most. Films that explore grief, isolation, loneliness, loss, identity, mental health, addiction. And these are universal fears that don't just disappear because the film ends. If you've seen any of these horror movies, let me know which one scared you the most. And if you have another horror movie that terrified you but almost nobody talks about, leave it in the comments below. Because honestly, those hidden gems are always the horror films that end up haunting you the most. If you enjoyed this video, consider hitting that like button. Every single like, every single share that we get goes a long way to help support this channel. With your help, we've already managed to get to 5,000 followers here on YouTube, which is astonishing considering we've only been taking this seriously for about a month. And if you're not subscribed and you like this type of content, consider hitting that subscribe button. We release 2 videos every week where we talk everything horror, disturbing movies, upsetting documentaries. But you can also find me on TikTok, on Instagram, and on Facebook, where we post horror videos every single day. If you're ever stuck for ideas of what you want to watch tonight, there are hundreds upon hundreds upon hundreds of recommendations on these socials. That's it for this video. Make sure you look after yourself and look after other people. Thanks for watching.